Hello again. Today we're going to be looking at another exciting topic, and that is ecological succession. And we're also going to be adding up with overcrowding and food shortage. Now, this topic is actually very interesting, and I would like you to pay rapt attention to this topic. Let's look at the content of what we're going to actually cover in this topic. The first thing we're looking at is the meaning of ecological succession. We are going to be looking at the meaning of ecological succession. We're also going to be looking at what we call a climax community. We're also going to be talking about general characteristics of ecological succession. We're going to be talking about the types of succession. We're also going to be looking at factors that result in a bare surface or barren area. We're also going to be talking about the outcomes. What are the outcomes of succession? What do you see? What is the, will I say, manifestation or outcome or expression of an ecological succession? We're also going to be talking about major communities in a plant succession. And then also talking about overcrowding, we'll look at the meaning of overcrowding, factors that affect overcrowding, the effects of overcrowding, adaptation to avoid overcrowding, just a few things we're going to mention. And we're also going to be looking at what food shortage is, causes of food shortage, and then effects of food shortage. Now, quickly, let's take a look at these exciting points we are going to be highlighting a bit. Now, we're talking about ecological succession. Now, what exactly is ecological succession? Now, I will define it as an orderly series of change. It's an orderly series of change which occurs in living organisms over a period of time until what we call a stable community is established. Until a stable community is established. I repeat, it is an orderly series of changes which occurs in living organisms. When we're talking about living organisms, we're actually looking at both plants and animals in living organisms over a long period of time until a stable climax community is established. Now, it usually, if you look at what we're trying to say here, you will understand with me that it actually usually starts in a newly formed or a barren land, or you can say an abandoned building. That is where ecological succession begins from. And then it ends up with a climax community. And what is actually a climax community? Now, a climax community is established when a stable or unchanging community is established. That is when you have the same organism over and over, year in, year out. The same organism is found on that particular place, on that particular piece of land. It is referred to as a climax community. Hence, the vegetation reaches its highest development, and the same plant or the same species of plants and animals reoccur year after year. That is when we say a climax community has been established or reached. Okay, and the organisms you find in a climax community are usually complex organisms. They are not actually simple organisms. Then we also have what we call general characteristics. How do you know? What are the characteristics? What are the features of an ecological succession? Number one, like we've just said before, it begins in a newly formed open habitat. Please note, ecological succession begins in a newly formed open habitat, or it happens in a barren land or an abandoned farmland. That is where ecological succession begins. Number two general characteristics of ecological succession is that changes are orderly and it develops in a certain sequence. The change is orderly. It moves from one stage to another stage, to another stage, to another stage, till it gets to the climax stage. All right? So the changes are orderly and it develops in a certain sequence. Number three, pioneers. When we say pioneers, we're talking about the earliest colonizers. That's the first colonizers in that abandoned land or that barren land, okay? The first colonizers, they usually have short lifespan, that they don't live for long. They don't stay there for long. They usually have short lifespan and are usually very few species. They can be replaced by smaller herbaceous plants in terms of plants. Number 4, the rate of successional changes is or are rapid. Okay, rate of successional changes are rapid at first. They are very rapid. That is when the first colonizers are there. Before you move to the second, the change, okay, the changes that takes place is usually very fast, very fast. But it slows down later until a final climax is reached. And then number 5 characteristics to note is that succession occurs over a period of time. Like I said, it is not spontaneous, it's not instantaneous. Number 6, death of the pioneers adds some organic matter to the soil and favors the establishment or emergence of a new species. Now, these are the general characteristics of a successful ecological succession. Now, the next thing to note is how many types of succession do we have? We have basically 2 types of ecological succession. The first one is called the primary succession. Number 2, we have the secondary succession. Now, what exactly is the primary succession? Now, primary succession is a type of succession that starts on a bare surface, a barren surface or a barren land, which have not borne vegetation. That is, vegetation has not grown on that particular place. It is a bare surface. Now, it usually starts with lower organisms and takes a longer time to reach a climax community. Now, examples of primary succession can be found in ponds. You can see it in ponds. You can see it on vegetations, on rocks. You can see it on rocks. You can see it on mangrove forest, estuarine, etc. Now, these are places where you can have primary succession. Now, if you see on the screen there, we have a bare rock. Are you seeing that? Now, lichens and mosses starts growing on those rocks. Now, grasses and herbs starts growing on that particular area. From there, you now have shrubs and bushes. From there, you now have a young tree and pines. From there, you have mature trees like oaks, and so on until it reaches a climax community. Now, that is what we call primary succession. Now, secondary succession. Secondary succession is a type of succession that starts on already colonized surface. Now, this surface has been colonized, vegetation has actually grown on it before. All right? So it's a type of succession that starts on already colonized surface. Now, it starts with fairly complex organisms and it takes a shorter time to reach a climax community. Now, examples of secondary successions, we have abandoned farmlands and grassland. Abandoned farmlands and grassland. As you can see there on the screen, we have the climax community. Now, remember we said already colonized surface. Now, what will make that already colonized surface to look like an abandoned farmland? Sometimes fire outbreak. Now, you see that we have disturbances like fire. Now, when the disturbances like fire comes, it now clears that whole vegetation and the place remains bare and abandoned. And then succession starts taking place where lichens and moss starts growing on those bare places. But first of all, it starts with a climax community. So note the difference between a primary succession and secondary succession. Secondary succession begins or starts on a place that does not have any vegetation at all, that has not borne any vegetation at all. But a secondary succession starts in a place that once had vegetation, and that vegetation may have been cleared out by fire outbreaks. Okay? Now, the next thing to note is factors that results in a bare surface. Now, remember we were just talking about secondary succession. We said that a secondary succession starts in a place that has a vegetation before, all right? Now, what actually brings about the clearing of a particular place to become bare and barren or abandoned? Now, we have cases like erosion, we have cases like volcanic ash, we have cases like landslide, earthquakes, hurricane, tornado, we have extreme drought, we have mining activities and so on, even fire outbreaks. These are some of the things that can cause that can cause or result in a bare surface. Now, outcomes of succession. Outcomes of succession. Now, replacement of simpler or lower organisms by a complex ones. These are the things that happens during succession. There is always a replacement. Remember, we have what we call the pioneers, the earliest colonizers. They are replaced. They are replaced. Even the ones that replaces those earlier colonizers will be replaced by another. Okay, so there is always replacement of simple or lower organisms by complex ones. Number two is that changes in the physical environment, which includes structural changes in species and the activities in that particular community. Number three, there is an attainment of equilibrium point. Now, when we say equilibrium point, it is reached when the wide variety of organisms in a community is the same as neighboring communities, when there is a balance. Okay, what you see in this particular area is what you're seeing in another particular area. We say there is an attainment of equilibrium point. That is a balance. And then what else do you see as an outcome of succession is climax community forms the final stage. So the final stage is usually a climax community. Now, major communities in a plant succession. Now, let's take a look at plants. We want to talk about plant succession. Now, looking at the plant succession, let's look at the major communities, major steps. Remember, we said there are steps, developmental steps that takes place. Okay, now let's look at those major communities or major steps. The first one is what we call the pioneer colonizers, or you can say the earliest colonizers. Now, these are the first groups of plants in the succession. Now, these first groups of plants I mentioned the other time, and I said examples include the lichen, it includes the moss, it includes liverwort, it includes algae. So these are 3 or 4 important colonizers, pioneers you're going to see in a succession, mostly in a plant succession. Now, they are usually small, they are power plants, and they have high drought resistance. Now, they require minimum space and nutrients, but the truth is that their lifespan is very short. The next one is called the intermediate community, or you can call it the development community. Now, the intermediate community are a series of communities that replaces those early colonizers or pioneers. Okay, now they include examples like the cedar acuta, we have the herbivorous plants, we have the Imperator cylindrica, and so many of them, they are found in this category. They replace those pioneers. And then the last part, which is the final stage, is a climax community. Now, a climax community, this is the community that is most complex. That is where you find organisms that are more complex. The more complex organisms, they are bigger in life forms and so on. That's where you have the trees and you have the shrubs. Now, that is where you have the final or the climax community. Now, that is all we need to know about succession, all right? Now, moving quickly, let's talk about overcrowding. Now, what is overcrowding? Now, I would say overcrowding is a situation that occurs when there is an increase in the population of a particular species beyond the carrying capacity of that particular area, beyond the carrying capacity. Now, if a particular, let's give an instance, in a classroom, if the classroom is supposed to carry or accommodate, let's say 20 students, and all of a sudden 100 students are there. Now that is overcrowding. So it is beyond the carrying capacity of that particular class. So a situation where there is an increase in population of a particular species beyond the carrying capacity of that particular area, it is referred to as overcrowding. Now, what are the factors that cause overcrowding? What brings about overcrowding? The first one is what we call natality. Now, natality means birth rate. Now, when there is an increase in birth rate in a particular area, definitely there will be overcrowding or overpopulation in a particular area. Number two is increase in food supply or food availability. Now, where there is much food, that's where you see migration. Plants or animals, or mostly animals, tend to move towards areas where there is enough food supply, and that brings about overcrowding. Next is decrease in death rates, and we call that mortality. So mortality is death rate. So when there is a decrease in death rates, there will also be a reduction in, there will be an increase in population, or there will be overcrowding. Another one is immigration. Now, immigration has to do with the movement of people into a particular place. Emigration means the exit of people from a particular place. Now, once there is the immigration is increased, definitely it will lead to overcrowding or overpopulation. And then also lack of dispersal. We're going to be talking about dispersal of seeds. Now, when seeds are not dispersed, mostly in terms of fruits and plants, or plants mostly, when their seeds or fruits are not easily dispersed, okay, it will bring about overcrowding of those plants in a particular area. And these have so many negative effects, which we're going to be looking at. And then the last one factor that causes overcrowding is absence of predators. Yes. Now, predators also help to reduce overcrowding. So when there is an absence of predators, it means there will be, to an extent, increased population of animals. Now, remember we were talking about overcrowding, and I mentioned to you that some of these things that happens or causes overcrowding, they have a negative effect. Now, let's take a look at some of the effects of overcrowding. Number one, shortage of food. Shortage of food. Now, remember we said that it is increase in food supply or availability that brings about overcrowding. Now, once that particular food supply or available food supply is depleted by the increased number of persons or population of a particular species that is there, once it is reduced, definitely, so once that the population is increased, it will keep increasing as long as there is availability of food. Now, the time will come where the number of species or population of species in that particular place will be greater than the availability of food, and that's what we call shortage of food. We're going to be talking about food shortage much later in this particular presentation. Now, the next effect of overcrowding is competition. Now, due to limited resources, there will be competition where living organisms struggle for space, they struggle for nutrients, they struggle for all the necessities of life, they struggle for air and so many other things, okay? And of course, in evolution, in Darwin's theory, we'll say survival of the fittest. Number three is spread of diseases, definitely. Overcrowding is another easier means through which disease is being spread. Mostly airborne, even waterborne, even diseases by contact. They can be easily spread when there is overcrowding. The next one is tendency to prey or feed on one another. Now, that's when competition has gone too far, all right? When competition has gone too far based on the short supply of food. And definitely remember, we just mentioned survival of the fittest. Most times competition leads to death. Organisms that cannot survive in that particular struggle for all the necessities of life end up dead or end up leaving that particular area. These are some of the effects of overcrowding. Now, what are the adaptive features to avoid overcrowding? Now, remember I told you about something about lack of dispersal of seeds. Now, there are several features that can help living organisms, plants, animals alike, to help them actually reduce overcrowding or control overcrowding. One of the important ways in terms of plants is called dispersal of seeds. Dispersal of seeds. Now, when seeds are accurately dispersed and fruits are dispersed, it tends to create a space between one plant and another. And once there is this space between them, they can easily reach out to the soil and absorb water and mineral salt easily. They have enough space for their growth and healthy development. Okay, so dispersal of seeds and fruits is grand and important. Number two is territorial behavior. Now, some organisms, mostly animals, mark out a particular area where they defend it against intruders. In fact, they don't allow other organisms or other animals to come close to it. An example is lion. The lion is actually a territorial animal. Even humans are territorial. Okay, so territoriality also helps to an extent to avoid overcrowding. We also have emigration, not immigration, emigration. Remember I said emigration has to do with leaving a particular area, okay, coming out or exiting out of a particular area. Now, exiting, if there is high or there is an increase in emigration, definitely there will be a decrease in overpopulation or overcrowding. And then next one is production of canopies by tall plants. Now, some plants actually have branches that with leaves that looks like canopies. Now, these canopies actually help. They actually starve, will I say to an extent, starve smaller plants, okay, grasses and other smaller plants that are underneath. They starve them of sunlight. They deprive them of sunlight. They deprive them of a whole lot of things. And these plants gradually with time, they die off. This is also another way to reduce overcrowding. We also have swarming of bees and termites. Now, at a particular season, some bees and termites move out from their nest, go to other places to establish their own colonies. All right? So that is also another way of dispersal, okay, but in dispersion rather, but it is in terms of animals. So we call that swarming of termites or bees. And so many other ways through which living organisms put forth adaptive features that can help them avoid overcrowding. Now, food shortage. We've talked about food shortage. I believe everyone have an idea what it means to have food shortage. Now, it is actually a situation that occurs when the supply of food is not enough for a given population in a given area. When the supply of food is not enough for a particular population in a given area, you said there is food shortage. Now, what are the causes of food shortage? Number one, overpopulation brings about food shortage. We've just talked about overcrowding. Overcrowding, overpopulation, they mean the same thing. So an increase in population without a corresponding increase in food supply tends to create food shortage. Other aspects or factors that can cause food shortage includes poor storage facilities. Now, when these food are gotten from the farm and so many other places where they are sourced from, if there is no effective storage mechanism or facilities, they can go bad, they can be infected by pests and so many other things, and then destroy these food crops in no time. Another thing again that destroys, brings about food shortage is flooding. Now, flooding is the washing, okay, is where a river overflows its bank. In fact, flooding brings about soil erosion, which has to do with the washing away of the top layer of the soil, which removes also soil nutrients. And once it is actually removing these soil nutrients, plants don't grow well. And of course, when plants don't grow well, it leads to food shortage. And then we also have drought. Now, drought is a situation where there is little or no water in a particular area. In that case, plants don't grow well. Remember that plants actually need water. They need water for photosynthesis to carry out the process of photosynthesis. So when there is no water, plants tend to die faster out of dehydration. We also have pests. We have diseases, bush burning, war, infertility of the soil. All these are factors that causes food shortage. And then what are the effects of food shortage? Well, I'm going to close with this. One of the effects of food shortage is competition. When the food, available food is low, when there is a, reduced availability of food, definitely it will lead to an increase in competition among organisms. Another one, it brings about emigration, because living organisms will start leaving that particular area and looking for other places where they can source food. It also brings about a decline in the rate of reproduction, and finally it can also lead to death. Okay, one of the effects of food shortage is that it can lead to death of organisms. Now, this is where we're going to call it a wrap-up. But before I go, I would like to pick one or two questions using the ExamGuide app. Please, let's just look at just few questions on food shortage. We have about 10 questions here. Let's pick just few of them. Now, they said the following observations concerning successions are true except. Now, remember we talked about the major communities, and I gave you about 3 important major communities. We talked about the pioneers, we talked about the intermediate, and then we talked about the climax community. Now, look at this question. A, pioneer community has fewer species. That is correct. Middle stage communities are most diverse. That's not true. Okay, so that's the correct answer. Then climax community has the greatest number of species, yes. And the total biomass of the community increases as succession progresses, and that is also very true. So the one that is not part of succession is B. Moving ahead, we have the order of primary succession by plants in a very dry habitat. Now, in a very dry habitat, it needs to start with a mesophyte. Now, from mesophyte, you go to shrubs. From shrubs, it will now move to xerophytes. Now, xerophytes are actually organisms that can survive in a very dry place. Shrubs can also survive in dry places, but not very dry, while mesophytes can survive in places that are both dry, and not too dry, and also not too wet. So it will always begin with this and then advance as it continues, because this is a very dry habitat. It is never going to be wet. Okay, so the correct answer should be C. Next, which of the following will be a colonizing species of a heap of moist shrub? Okay, moist subsoil. Okay, a heap of moist subsoil. The correct answer to this particular question is green algae. Okay, a green algae. And then question 4, and I'm going to end with this. Okay, let's do to 5. If a piece of abandoned farmland went through a series of floral, when you say floral, it means plants. Fauna is animals, okay? So series of floral and fauna changes and becomes established with a permanent plant and animal population, it could be said to have undergone, of course, it would have said to have undergone succession.